In my last video, I built this miter guide from scratch for my table saw, but it was a little bit rushed and I did make some mistakes. And I also didn't make it as functional as I should have. And in this video, I want to more properly correct the mistakes that I made and also make it more precise. The first thing I want to make is a new stop. As I said in the original build, I made some mistakes, including putting the knob on the back where it interfered with the folding fence. And even though I fixed that in the video, it wasn't ideal. And also, the stop that I made wasn't wide enough for the knob that I'm using. So I want to make one that's configured properly to begin with, and also wide enough so that the knob I'm using won't stick out past the edge. Once again, I'm going to be using plywood and solid wood to make it. And the only real difference is that I'm going to be doing it right this time. And I'm also going to do a couple of extra things with it to make it work better. The first improvement is to drill a large hole through the stop block, and this is optional of course, but I think it looks neat. And also it makes the stop block a little bit lighter. The other improvement, which is actually a real improvement, is to cut a slot in the back of the stop itself and also in the face of the fence so that I can put a spline in there that will keep the stop square to the top of the table saw. And also keep it in place so it's harder to take off, as in I won't be tempted to just slip it off and lay it down somewhere. I'd have to actually slide it off, and that means that I'm less likely to lose it. That worked well, and this next fix is not very big at all. It's just a filler to go into the sliding dovetail that I cut in the folding part of the fence to make it so that that slot is not as deep. Also, to keep that folding part of the fence from flopping around, I'm adding a magnet, actually two, to hold it in the folded position when I don't need it. Now, I didn't film any of the next part, but I did take some pictures. And what I'm doing here is I'm setting up the miter guide so that it will lock at different angles with a pin. And that way it'll be accurate every time I use it at that angle. And I'm going to do three here. The first one's at 90 degrees. And I'm using my big framing square lined up with the miter slot in my table saw. And then I'll double check that against the side of the blade itself. And to verify that is actually a 90-degree cut, I'm cutting a sliver off a scrap of plywood that's about 6 inches wide and measuring both ends. If they're equal after flipping the stock over and making the second cut, then you're cutting a 90-degree angle. With the guide set at 90 degrees, I took it over to the drill press and I drilled a 1/4-inch hole through the protractor part and also through the guide bar underneath. That way I can take the shank of a drill bit, that's a 1/4-inch, and use that as a locking pin. Next, I want to do a 22.5-degree angle, and the easiest way to do this, once again, is with the framing square. What you do is you line up the 18-inch mark on the inside of the framing square with the edge of the miter slot, and then the 7 7/16 mark on the inside again with the edge of the miter slot, and that'll give you a 22.5-degree angle. Another possibility, if your miter saw cuts accurate 22.5-degree angles, is to cut a bigger piece of plywood on the saw and then use that. And then to verify that the angles are a precise 22.5, I broke apart that octagonal frame that I put together in the first video and recut the parts to check. And as you can see, it goes together with no gaps. Then I can take the guide back over to the drill press and drill through the protractor through that hole that I already drilled. Then I can do the same at 45 degrees. Once again, I'm using the framing square. And of course, the idea here is to have equal dimensions on the inside, both the long leg and the short leg. and that'll give you 45. But once again, it's very important to make a test cut to make sure that it is accurate before drilling the hole for the pin, and that's what I did. This stock is 4 inches wide, and it looks like it's 90 degrees when you put it together first, but up against the square you can see that it's open. So I made a very slight adjustment to the miter guide and recut it, and I got it a lot better. So once again, I brought it over to the drill press and I drilled that third hole, and here you can see all 3. Now, while cutting the 45-degree miter, I noticed that the stock was slipping. And I've also noticed this on other jigs where the stock has to be held super tight to keep it from moving or clamped in place. And I figured the best way to overcome that problem was to glue some fine sandpaper onto the face of the jig. So that's what I'm going to do here. I cut a piece off the long edge of a sheet, and I'm going to use very thin double-sided tape to stick it down. I cut the shank off a 1/4 inch drill bit and I glued it into a small block of oak for the locking pin, and now I'm just shaping the knob to make that easy to put in and remove. And when I don't need it, I need a place to put it that's handy, so I'm just going to drill a hole in the top of the sub fence so it can fit in there. And with those improvements done, I can put the guide back on the table saw, put it together, and try it out. And I'm happy to say that even though I didn't make major changes to it, it does work better and I feel more confident using it. I think I'm going to be using this a lot in my shop from now on.